people just started disappearing. No one ever found them. I was telling our new neighbor who just packed in across our yard. She had become my friend and always came by to visit me. It all began in my village, a small, quiet place where everyone knew each other. The first to go missing was Amin, a man who sold fruits at the market. I remember because I saw him that morning. He smiled at me, like he always did, making jokes about his fruits and the farmers that cultivated the crops. He was a very jovial man. His jovial nature often drew people to buy his goods, but by evening he was gone. People thought he might have gone to visit relatives, but his family said they hadn't seen him after they hadn't heard any word from him in days. The villagers started to look for him as a missing person, as a kidnap case. Many people thought that he may have hurt someone with his jovial words. A week later, another person vanished. This time, it was Kofi, a quiet fisherman. He had gone out to the river early in the morning, like he always did. But when the sun set and the river was quiet, his boat came back alone, floating with no one inside. That's when people in the village began to whisper. I was there when we found Kofi's boat. His net was still in the water, full of fish. Some said it was the water spirit, that maybe Kofi had not pacified the water gods before he set out to fish. The villagers implored the young men of the community to go look for his body, but they came back to shore with nothing. The elders suspected the river gods had taken him and would release his corpse to shore when they please. It was strange. We didn't want to talk about it, but we all thought the same thing. Something was out there, and it took Kofi, and it may have taken our Amin. 2 weeks had passed without us hearing anything about Amin. Then the river gods hadn't still released Kofi from the river like the elders had said. One evening, I was walking home after fetching water from the river. It was already dark and the path felt longer than usual. The trees rustled heavily, as though huge wind was passing through the path. But it wasn't cold, and I could hear my own footsteps echoing. Then I heard something behind me. Footsteps, but they weren't mine. I stopped and looked around, but I didn't see anything. The air felt heavy. I rushed home, heart pounding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next day, my neighbor's son, Tunde, went missing. I felt a chill run through me because I had seen Tunde that evening. He was on his way to his friend's house when I heard footsteps behind me. I spoke with him, and he even invited me to join him after I finished my chores. But I was too tired from fetching water, so I declined. His mother cried for days. Tunde was her only child, and no one could help her. Everyone in the village was too scared. The men went out to look for him, but they didn't find anything. I told my mother about the last time I saw Tunde and what we talked about. The villagers asked Tunde's friend, Uso, about him. Uso said Tunde never made it to his house that evening. He thought maybe something came up, and that's why Tunde didn't come. The fear grew stronger when 2 men will get missing per week. Families left the village. Some said they were going to the city, where it was safer. The rest of us who stayed, we just prayed. Prayed that we wouldn't be next. Then the police became involved, but yet it solved nothing as people still got missing under their very nose. In even one case, a police officer was also missing, as his colleagues couldn't find him in his duty post by the morning time. Throughout all these times, only the men were mysteriously missing, so people thought only the men were in danger. For 2 months, it was always the men who went missing. Amina's husband also became the victim. Then 2 brothers from the farm, and later the blacksmith. All of them were strong and healthy young men. No one could figure out why. The village was filled with fear, but after a while, we thought we had an answer. Whatever was taking people only wanted the men. The elders told us that men shouldn't walk alone anymore. They had to go in groups if they needed to go to the farm, the river, or even to visit friends. And for a while, it seemed like it was working. No one else disappeared. Life in the village started to feel a bit normal again. Then, one day, everything changed. It was market day, and 5 women went together to sell their goods in the neighboring village. 3 were married women, and the other 2 were teenagers who had followed their mothers to help sell. They never came back. By sunset, when they hadn't returned, their families began to worry. I remember their husbands went out searching for them, thinking maybe they'd had trouble on the road. But when the men came back, there was nothing. No signs of the women, no broken baskets, no tracks. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. That night, the village was silent. Everyone was too scared to speak. Now, it wasn't just the men going missing. After the women disappeared, panic spread fast. People didn't know what to believe anymore. Some said it was a spirit, angry at us for some reason we didn't know. Others thought it was something more human, like a group of bandits or enemies from another village. But there were no answers. A few days later, a group of our young men decided to take matters into their own hands. They planned to stay awake all night and watch the village from different spots. They wanted to catch whoever was doing this, or at least protect the rest of us. We all hoped they would find something. I'll never forget that night. It was colder than usual, and the air felt heavy, like something bad was about to happen. Everyone stayed inside their homes, peeking through windows and waiting. I hugged my mother so tight that night, as though whatever it was might also come for me. The village was in a vigil, no one could sleep. Sleep had deluded us. If you had the guts to walk through homes that night, you would notice that everybody's house was still lit up by their kerosene lamps. Hours passed, and nothing happened. No strange noises, no shadows. I started to think maybe whatever was taking people had left us alone. Maybe they have noticed that our people was determined to catch them. Maybe it was over and they have retreated. I even fell asleep. But just before dawn, a scream broke the silence. We rushed outside to see what had happened. One of the young men who had been watching the village was gone. Just like the others, there was no sign of him, no tracks, nothing. The other young men looked terrified, shaken. They had no idea how he vanished without a sound, without anyone seeing a thing. He had just disappeared. His friend who had been keeping vigil with him that night at that spot had walked a bit to the bush to ease himself briefly, and came back to see no sign of him. After that night, the village fell apart. More families packed up and left, afraid they'd be next. My father started to plan our departure as well. Even the elders, who had always seemed calm and wise, were scared. No one knew what to do anymore. Some people said we were cursed, and that the village itself was to blame. Many people wanted to leave, but they couldn't afford to move. No one wanted to buy land in our village because it was slowly becoming deserted. No one moved into our village either because word had spread about what was happening. The families that stayed decided to move closer to each other, hoping it would keep us safer. It brought us closer, and for a while, it worked. But we knew it wasn't over. Whatever was taking people would find another way to keep doing it. Soon after the young man disappeared during the village watch, the remaining villagers became desperate. Some of the elders suggested a final attempt to visit one old wise woman who lived deep in the forest, someone known for her strange knowledge of things no one else understood. She was also a herbalist who knew how to heal people with leaves of the forest. A small group set off to find her. When they arrived at her hut, the wise woman listened to their story in silence, her eyes dark and distant. After a long pause, she spoke in a low voice. "The land you live on is not cursed, just as some of you believe. It's not only the spirits or the forest. There is something beneath the earth that is holding your people captive." Confused, the villagers asked her for answers. There was hope in her words. It meant their people might still be alive somewhere. But she told them to wait for someone among them, to have a dream, and to follow the directions from that dream. The villagers asked, who would have the dream? Would it be a man or a woman? But the old lady just went inside her house, which meant she was done talking. The villagers were frustrated, but they had no choice but to hope she was right. That night, everyone wondered who would have the dream that would help them. But that meant they all had to go to sleep, which was hard to do since many of them stayed awake at night to keep watch. They decided to take turns sleeping, hoping someone would have the dream. But even with a schedule, no one could sleep deeply enough to dream. After 2 weeks, still no one had a dream that gave them a solution. More people who could afford to leave started moving away. Even the policemen went back to their headquarters, saying they would bring more help, but we never heard from them again. One night, one girl named Ababi had a strange dream. In it, she saw the missing villagers living in a hidden underground village, trapped under the control of a powerful entity. The villagers were alive, but worked in a trance-like state, unable to escape. In the dream, Ababi saw a large tree with roots that reached deep underground, connecting the village to the surface. The tree seemed to pulse with energy, as if it was feeding on the people's life force. When Ababi woke, she told the elders about her dream. At first, they wanted to wave away the dream as out of a little girl's fear, but due to their desperation, they were willing to try anything. The elders decided to follow her vision and set off to find the tree. The villagers divided themselves in equal numbers, those that will stay behind in the village and those that will go into the forest. Following Ababi's lead, the villagers trekked deep into the forest, where they came upon the massive tree from her dream. Its roots were thick and gnarled, disappearing into the earth. They searched the area and found nothing. The villagers went back home, tired, frustrated, and disappointed. After weeks of fear and confusion, a young hunter named Aid, who usually stayed in the city but came home to get hunting skills from his father, called our elders in a meeting and told them that what was happening in the village didn't feel like a curse or a spirit, but something more human was at work. Aid had noticed that the disappearances always happened near the river or on the outskirts of the village, where the land was less traveled. The elders listened to him because they were open to every suggestion. Later on, a group of villagers, led by Alde, decided to investigate the areas where the people had last been seen. While searching one of these areas, Ada stumbled upon something unusual. The ground, which appeared normal at first glance, had a strange pattern, a series of small covered holes hidden beneath leaves and branches. When he carefully removed the covering, he realized they were traps, deep pits with wooden stakes at the bottom. Ada called the attention of the people, and they declared that they had always seen the trap, and that it was meant for animals. But Aid disagreed with them and mentioned that the traps were too deep and too big for only animals. It became clear to the other villagers that these traps could also have been set to capture people, not animals. But what happened to the missing people? Aid's group decided to explore the area further. Soon after they saw those traps down to the point of the tree that Ababi had seen in her dream deep in the forest. Then they remembered the old woman words, "Someone will have a dream, follow their direction." They all ran back to the village and informed the elders of what they thought the problem could be. And Ababi was called for, and she narrated everything she had seen in her dream. The group of men led by Ada went back to the forest and followed the directions of Ababi's dream. They went back to the tree and looked around, and eventually they discovered a hidden entrance to a hidden tunnel leading underground, just as Ababi had seen in her dream. It was partially concealed by large rocks and green leaves that were dangling on the entrance. Inside the tunnel, they descended into a large underground chamber that took them to the outskirts of their neighboring village. Aid and his group overheard the voices of two men talking. It was then that they realized the truth. Bandits from a neighboring area had been capturing villagers to force them into labor, mining minerals from a secret underground vein they had discovered. The bandits were ruthless, but they had been careful to keep their operation hidden, staging the disappearances to look like mysterious vanishings to avoid attention. Aid and his group devised a plan. They waited for nightfall, then quietly overpowered the two bandits guarding the tunnel entrance. Once inside, they freed the captives and led them back to the surface. The villagers, though weak and scared, were overjoyed to see Aid's group and quickly helped each other escape. After rescuing the missing villagers, Aid's group returned to the village with the truth. The villagers organized a larger group and returned to the tunnels the next day, ensuring the bandits were caught and brought to justice. The bandits had been operating for months, using the isolated location to stay hidden. They had also been capturing other villagers from the other neighboring villages too. But with the villagers' return, their plan was exposed and destroyed. The mystery of the disappearances was solved, and the village was finally safe.
If you enjoyed this video, do well to leave a like and a subscribe so that we may continue to bring content just like this one. And comment what you learned from the story. We will be so glad to hear from you.